All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this Q2 Leadership Poll Series results briefing. I'm Brooks Rayford. I'm CEO of the North Carolina Technology Association, or NC Tech. And at the advent of COVID back in early 2020 and into the summer, when there was a lot of uncertainty and people wondered all sorts of things about how each other were handling COVID as it impacts their business in particular, the association began to do some polling on a fairly rapid basis, frequent basis, in the April, May, and June timeframe to sort of gauge sentiment. How were people affected? What were their fears? What were their optimists? How optimistic were they about coming out of the pandemic, and so forth? And it got a lot of attention, a lot of interest from our members, from the media, and others, just to know what the leaders in the tech sector were thinking anyway. And so we began to do a few more of those kinds of polls in various ways over the balance of that year and during 2021. And coming into 2022, as we sort of seem to be coming out of the worst of COVID, the vaccines being available, all that sort of thing, and 21 having been a pretty good year for business, and in particular for the tech sector, we felt like it would be a good idea to, in an ongoing way, have a quarterly poll that would, again, take the pulse or gauge the sentiment of our leadership. On some questions, it might relate to COVID. Those questions may change to other more timely things as time moves on. And then some questions that would be consistent about how the business is doing. Are you hiring or not? What is your outlook for those things? And so we did launch that for 2022. And the idea was to conduct the poll in the first month of a quarter. We would go out to about 300 leaders in the tech sector community, at least in our definition of that, which would include the members of our board of directors, the members of our board of advisors, CEOs of North Carolina-based tech companies, and also site leaders. These are people who are the top executive for a global company that might have a North Carolina tech hub. So North Carolina has quite a few of those. And all that together comes to about 300 people. This most recent poll that we did for Q2 had about a 35% response rate. And we did change a few of the questions or edit them slightly from Q1. I'll make a note of that as we go through. It's pretty straightforward. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge Stearns Financial. They are a longtime member and supporter of NC Tech. They have been the sponsor of these various polling initiatives over time, and were quick to agree to sign on this year for this more formalized approach. And I'm very grateful for that. And Dennis Stearns is here with us today. Dennis, if you'll say a word about you and the firm. Dennis is on our board of advisors, and so very active that way. But say a few words, and then I'll get to the slides.
Sure. Thanks, Brooks. Welcome, everyone. We're happy to be part of this process, and in many of the businesses we work with, many of which are members of NC Tech, and private businesses as well as public companies, there's some interesting times that we're experiencing right now, and some interesting cross currents. And so as we go through the slides, we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that were ahas for Brooks and I in the new numbers, and some of the things that didn't show up that we thought might. So here we go.
Very good. All right, well, let's get to it. If you'll move to the next slide. So the first few are just to give you a sense of who's answering this survey, to give you some awareness of that. We asked folks what range of employees are North Carolina based for your organization. You can see it's pretty well distributed among companies of all sizes. This sort of reflects the mix of our membership as well. So I won't go through each one of these, but you can see the distribution there, and we can move to the next one. This also remarkably similar to the first quarter poll, and remarkably similar to our actual mix of members of the association, meaning companies and organizations. About 2/3 of our member companies are based in North Carolina, and the response rate reflects that. Next. You'll see we have a very high participation rate among C-suite leaders, and there are other categories here, but very much a senior group of people who were providing answers. And these are folks from all over the state. Next. So this question is a little bit different from the first quarterly question. In the first quarter, we asked this question and a few others in terms of 12 months. So we did ask, how do you perceive the first quarter of, I'm sorry, the one we did ask was, how do you perceive the previous 12 months? This time we changed that to be quarter, since these polls will be quarterly, and we now have a quarter under our belt since the first poll. And you'll see, obviously, very strong positive sentiment here. Good and great together account for about 85% of the responses, and that's on par with even the 12-month question last time. Next. Then we asked, how has the first quarter been for your organization? And you see that it's also a pretty high number. So in the first quarter, it was interesting. There was a bit of a gap here. A higher percentage of respondents thought their own organization had had a good previous 12 months. Slightly less, lower percentage thought that the tech sector had had as much. This time, there's a little bit more parity here. Next. Now we do a future question, which is the next quarter our business will be. And you see that it's about 69% say we will grow, about 28% say we'll stay about the same. This slide probably has the greatest gap from the first quarter slide. And I think it's because, again, in the first quarter, we asked about the upcoming 12 months. So as people look at a longer horizon of all of 2022, that grow part of the circle was around 80%. And to stay the same was a good bit lower. When you're asking about a shorter term horizon where people are thinking about immediate factors, and Dennis, I'd be interested in your comment on this, but with inflation being prime in the news these days, with the war and the impact on supply chain and energy and so forth that it's having, it's not terribly surprising that the optimism might have been tamped down a tad when you're asking about the next 3 months. And Dennis, you work with businesses, so what are you hearing?
Well, and I was actually happy to see that this didn't fall further than it actually did, because we just had a survey come out from the National Federation of Independent Business on how small businesses are viewing the world. It was some of the worst data they've had since they began keeping records. And so it was a plunge in sentiment and optimism as a result of some of those things that you mentioned. Some of the things I'm trying to sell are hung up in Shanghai right now on a ship, or a resurgence of even the pandemic has started to circulate among a couple of boards of, okay, this probably isn't March 2020, but there may be a different chapter of this developing. And then just the whole inflation piece, which I know we're going to get to some really interesting survey results in a few minutes on inflation.
Right. Very true. Okay, we can go to the next one. So this is sort of an eye chart here, but we have 2 slides that look like this. The pandemic has impacted businesses in many ways. Please rate the following as it applies to your organization. As you look across the descriptions, the first column being focused more on new products, then focused more on client services. And then some of the rest are about employees, focus on employees, allowing employees to set their own schedules, trying to increase pay and benefits for those employees, et cetera. Most of these are very similar to the previous survey. However, the category of neither agree nor disagree, which is the pink, are a little larger in the ones where you see them larger. The first column, the 6th column, and the 7th column. And maybe that's just a function of less certainty right now, where people don't feel confident enough to say that they're positive or negative. But you can definitely see the columns that have the most combined blue tend to focus on employees, health and safety of employees, ability to work remotely, employee retention, and increased recruitment efforts. Are the high ones there.
Yeah, and I think, Brooks, this is again suggesting that the North Carolina technology and tech-enabled companies may have some increasing level of uncertainty, but it's not as much as many other sectors.
Correct.
Business sectors, Because I think if you did this on a much broader scale, that pink would be much larger today.
I agree with you. We often have seen that in the polling over the last couple of years, where the results were surprisingly positive or optimistic about how business was resilient through even the difficult times of COVID. And that's not as true in retail and commodities and other areas. Whereas in tech, you can see why that might be. The demand for tech went up. Okay, next slide. All right, so what impact has the economic environment had on your hiring? Again, just as with the first quarterly poll, almost everybody is still hiring. Very few have frozen. And I believe we even offered an option, which was we have cut back, and that wasn't even chosen by anyone. So within the tech sector, hiring remains a very strong priority. Next. Here's the other one of those bar chart ones. This is, please rate North Carolina's strength for each of the following competitive areas. So how do we think we are, relatively speaking, in technology workforce, business climate, and so forth? And again, this one's pretty similar, actually. Areas where you expect North Carolinians to feel strongly about our strength, tech workforce, quality of life, are very much strong. Higher ed, again, comes in very strong. And again, the pink areas that are larger here did tick up a bit from first quarter, but overall, the leadership within the tech sector is bullish about the strengths, the fundamental strengths of North Carolina. And all of these elements are more important to some than others. Everyone has their own weight on these. Dennis, do you have any observations on this one?
Well, I think that the companies that I've always admired are the ones that create their own weather pattern, meaning that they figure out ways in advance to try to work around or under or over problems and challenges. Mm-hmm. And just last week, I was doing an interview for my new business owner book called Whitewater. And the company basically said, if there is a recession, mild or otherwise, in 2023, we don't plan to participate because we are investing. First of all, we're in North Carolina and our business segments are very strong and the companies we work with are very strong, but we're also investing in the areas for the future that we know we can control our own future for the most part. So again, I think that's a wonderful thing if companies and leadership teams can control their own weather patterns.
I like that term. That's good. Thank you. All right, next slide. So we asked, this is one of those open-ended questions where people could enter whatever they choose. What makes you optimistic about the next 12 months? We did ask the year version here. So it's interesting. Some of these you will also see on questions about what concerns you. So endemic, reduction of COVID some are optimistic that will be the case over the next 12 months. Others are seeing funding for tech projects growing. So they're seeing the pipeline of business grow. Consumer optimism seems to be something that people feel is strong or will continue to be strong. Increased in-person activity. We hear that anecdotally a great deal. The association has gone back to in-person meetings for the most part, and we've had very good response to that. And I'm hearing that from fellow association leaders, chamber leaders, and others, and frankly, demand from our members. We're really wanting to get back to in-person gatherings where they can. Interestingly, inflation shows up here as an optimism, but it's more about the optimism of the next 12 months, seeing a taming of inflation. And so if we'll go to the next slide, you'll see that inflation also shows up as the #1 concern by far. In this instance, we did give respondents a choice of these 5 or 6 items that are in the news today, but also gave people the chance to say other, and very few chose that, you'll see here. So really, when you list the 5 or 6, 7 items here, most people gravitated toward those. Inflation clearly is a major factor. Talent is no surprise that it's a high ranker. And if you really take the second 2 columns together, they're both about talent. The Great Resignation, as we've heard discussed quite a bit in the news these days, and then on down from that. Next. So we changed up the next question or two a little bit from last time. Last time we asked what percentage of your workforce is remote. And that was a little bit too hard to answer for some, because for some it was that on any given day, they might only have 50% of their workforce in, but it's not the same 50% necessarily. They might be rotating teams, people coming and going. So we asked it this way: what percentage of your workforce is still fully remote on any given day? And you can see here that we did these in quartiles. So, 45% said 75 to 100% of our workforce is remote on any given day. Another 22% almost said 50 to 75%. So taking those together, the 2/3 of the organizations are saying, the respondents are saying that more than 50% of their workforce is remote. So 2/3 are giving that answer. That still says there's a lot of hybrid workforce out there, or even fully remote. If you'll move to the next slide, a related question: what percentage of your employees can choose the degree to which they work remotely? I was surprised at the strength of the number one answer. A lot of companies have been implementing their return to office policies, and I was talking to the CEO of a North Carolina headquartered engineering company that has multiple offices, and he said they had decided starting this quarter to mandate that everybody spend 24 hours a week in the office. You can kind of do that however you wish, but Monday is the mandatory day. The rest you work out with your manager. So 3 days or one full day and a couple of half days here and a half day there. But the feedback they're getting is that the employees really want even more flexibility than that. So he is about to announce that they're going to go back to Mondays in office for the benefits that provides, and the rest is flexible. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But again, I was surprised that we had such a high percentage giving employees discretion. Even if you go to the next one down or behind it, the 13%, again, taken together, you're at, what is that, 2/3 again, combined are really giving employees pretty strong say here. Dennis, you run a business and you work with business leaders. What are you hearing about this?
Yeah, well, it varies so much by the type of business. So manufacturing clients that we work with, they have flexibility with some of their employees, but not most of their employees, just because of the nature of their company. Other companies have tremendous flexibility. And a lot also depends on what kind of talent war situation they're in.
Right.
So if they're in a highly competitive environment, which again, many of our members are in that category, they're trying to figure out flexibility to keep the people they already have, the people they want to keep, I should mention, and then attract others. So again, comments you've made about some interesting beach communities in North Carolina that have become NC Tech members because of people wanting to work from the beach.
Right.
And so, we are definitely in a sea change. And when I sit in on company strategic planning, there's an awful lot of dynamic tension between the culture piece and the flexibility piece. And so again, back to what you've been hearing lately is what I've been hearing, that companies are trying to figure out a balance to some of that.
And you're right, it certainly depends on the type of business, that's for sure, and the type of role. All right, next slide. So here's another open-ended question. Please elaborate on any long-term approaches your organization has taken around office and workforce policies. I think the first one on the upper left is one that there's near unanimous agreement about where possible, and that is hybrid to some degree is here to stay. Flexible environment is important. You talked about culture, Dennis. It shows up here as how can you figure out a way to build or sustain culture when you have such a hybrid or even remote environment. And you also see on here some different answers. No plans to return to the office. We've gone to fully remote. Well, there's certainly a subset that have done that. People who are the opposite. They believe proximity is needed for collaboration. In-office time is needed for collaboration. So there's a mix of answers here that you can see. You see there the 2 to 3 days a week in the office referenced and so forth. Okay, next. This is one we've asked before. What are your organization's future office space and facility plans? We were very surprised in quarter one at the answer to this question because in quarter one, the stay the same or add space combined were strong. Here you see the same. We saw a very similar response in Q2. 56% saying stay the same, keep our footprint. Another 20% saying we're going to grow. And that's counterintuitive maybe because on the one hand, we're hearing that companies are letting their employees have flexibility. They're not having their full staff in any sort of mandatory way. So why in the world would they keep the same amount of space, much less grow? Well, there's several factors at play there. One is you saw the slide that 6% are still hiring. So companies are growing, they're growing net employee base. So there's going to be some more need for space. Secondly, companies have completely reversed course on the density of their offices. They don't want people sitting super close together. They want to have collaboration space. So you need space, even if you have fewer people, if you're going to change the way the workspace is structured and organized and how flexible it is. A team might come in and work for a week or two together very intensely and then go back to remote again. Another team comes in. So as long as that's going on and you want to have that flexibility, then you may need the space that you've got or even more. So I'm sure our commercial real estate friends are very glad to see these results, especially that this is a fairly consistent answer that we're hearing. And Dennis, maybe you have a comment on this one.
Yeah, well, again, very interesting results. And I was with a company last week that has a younger workforce. And as all the mask requirements have lifted and they're out doing things again and having picnics and so forth, they said their incidence of people being out because of traditional illnesses, including the flu, is skyrocketing. And so a lot of firms are thinking, okay, maybe this distancing thing isn't just for COVID. Maybe it's for things that we've always had to live with.
There's been a lot about that. The flu, other things, you're right, common cold, the kind of things that have a related effect of our behaviors, whether it's masking, remaining distant, changing air systems, all of that improves health generally. And when you're back together, the risk, of course, returns. I actually did a review of our own organization in 2020, the height of COVID requiring people to work remotely. And I asked some fellow tech association CEOs this question, and they checked as well and noticed the same results. As when you're working fully remotely, people's use of sick leave, et cetera, goes down. If you're going to the office every day, you don't feel well one morning, you might be inclined to take a sick day because you just don't feel that great. If you're working from home anyway, you tend to sort of go ahead and work unless you're in real bad shape and not necessarily take time off, which can lead to burnout, which can lead to unhappy workers at all levels. And so to try to think about encouraging employees in a hybrid environment to have those mental health breaks and occasional windows of time when they're not fully on is very important. And mental health showed up in our early polling during COVID as a very key concern on the part of employers. So that's consistent. That might be the last slide that has data. It is. Okay. Well, Dennis, thank you again for the firm's support of this effort and also for your having been a partner on this. We're now almost into our third year. I hope everybody's enjoyed seeing these results. We have recorded today. We will be sending this out to everyone, including a link to the slides, which will be posted on our website. If you're registered for this event or were among those polled, you'll receive that. And I believe we'll also post it on our YouTube channel. So be on the lookout for that. The next quarterly poll will take place in July. And so we will schedule one of these web briefings at that time. And it'll be interesting to see what remains similar and what changes as sentiment is taken from our respondents. So thank you all very much and have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.